I work at a kindergarten, creche, nursery school. I don't know
Right.
what you call it in America. We have different themes like every 3 to 4 weeks. And the theme that we currently are busy with is occupations. And so we had like a dress up day of like dress up as something that you want to be. So naturally, I decided to dress up as a writer. And I know that people in our industry are very against ChatGPT, which is, I understand completely. But I was like, I kind of need something to show I'm a writer. And so I went on to ChatGPT and I was like, okay, make me a cover. And when I saw it, like it was kind of the first time that I actually believed that I could be a writer. To just actually like see my name there and see my title of my novel there, it just felt so real at the moment. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I can actually see this becoming a reality. Do you want to see the cover?
Yeah, if you have it. I can't imagine how that feeling would be.
Right? I just like covered it onto one of the books that I actually have on my shelf. Okay, so this is what it basically looks like. Okay.
That's so cute.
Right? I could totally see this on a shelf. And so technically this is a different person's book, but I was like, no, I'm just gonna keep it there for inspiration.
This is what I'm going for. It's a published book and it's going to have my name. It's perfect and it's beautiful and it's on my shelf. I can't wait. It's going to be a great day.
Right? I feel so too.
So today I'm going with my watermelon juice.
So because we have a South African guest today, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do a rooibos cappuccino today. So that is what I'm drinking today. Okay, are we ready for this episode?
We are ready.
Hi ho, let's go. Welcome to Tea and Tales. We are happy to have you here with us. I'm Madeleine Now.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. We especially would like to thank Mayana Mendez and Kevin Rogers. Thank you for tuning in each week. This week, our episode is a very special one on language, pathology, and speech. To join us for this very special topic that I know very little about, we have author Christien Neser. So please welcome Christien.
Hello, Christien. Welcome to Tea and Tales. We are very excited to have you here, not only as a speech pathologist, but also as an author.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
So, not only did you have your BA honors in French, I was like, that's amazing, because you went to go study in France, but you also worked as a school speech pathologist for almost 30 years, and then you published, and this is the part I love the most for any of our listeners, you published your first novel just before your 50th birthday. You are never too old to publish a novel.
I am the poster girl for late starters. And so if there are any late starters out there, it's never too late.
I always admired people who understood a lot about speech and how speech works in the speech pathologist arena that you are in, especially because there is so much in my family like dyslexia and autism and things like that need special attention. How does your work as a speech pathologist influence the way you write your novels?
Thanks. That's a very interesting question. And I think that is one of my motivating factors in writing. If you work with children with difficulties, you know that one of the biggest problems for parents is to have that child accepted and normalized. You want that child to have a fair chance in life. You want that child to be accepted and loved. You don't want the child to be regarded as an anomaly. So different, but not less. Whenever I tackle a story and I do use a character that has some speech impediment, I like to use that as part of the narration, but to show how you can conquer whatever you think is your big challenge. You can conquer it. It becomes part of the story. You get your Superman cape despite the fact that you stutter or that you're on the autism spectrum. You are a very, very special human being and you have a very special function. And let's make you the protagonist of a story. The different characters are always the most interesting characters, not the captain of the first team, not the superhero of the school. That slightly oddball character usually makes the best character for a story. So I like to use the children that I've dealt with in the past as characters. Change their names, change their situation, but I love to use that because that's what I know and that's what I can deal with.
I absolutely love how you say you use children whom you've worked with, because it's like a first base experience that you can actually work off of. I read that you actually wrote a novel about an autistic boy when he was 6 years old, and then 10 years later you wrote another book about him. Like, how was that when you wrote that for you?
Well, I worked with this child at a nursery school, the school where I was the speech pathologist. And of course, the call that I got from the teacher is, please come and help. There's a weird child in our class and we don't know what to do with him. And as I walked in, he was busy putting the little cars in a row, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, spacing them with exact spacing. And I immediately knew, oh, we are dealing here with a child that's possibly on the spectrum. And he turned around and he looked past me and he said, you drive an Audi. And I thought, my goodness, does that child have X-ray vision? And then suddenly I realized that my key holder was hanging from my finger and he could see the little circles of the Audi, on the key holder. And he asked me what make, what year, how many Ks on the clock. He asked me all these questions. What's my registration number? And the next day when I went to assess him, he could repeat everything. He remembered everything. So he actually diagnosed himself. Even though speech pathologists do not make a diagnosis of anything like autism, we leave that to a pediatrician or a neurologist to confirm. You know already. But I just developed a very interesting relationship with this child, because there was not an intimate relationship, because he was far more interested in my car and in whatever I brought along than in me, which is very often the case with children on the spectrum. The human being, the face, is just another face. It's just another grown-up in their life. And then I met the family, and as time went by, I asked his mom, there's so little in literature and nothing in Afrikaans about a highly functioning autistic child. Couldn't I try my hand at a story with him as a main character, the protagonist? We can change everything around, a new name, a new family, but this is a story that I feel that should be told. And they immediately agreed. Both parents are highly creative intellectuals. And then they started telling me about their weird family members. The one aunt that's been wearing the same set of glasses for about 10 years with plaster around them to keep it intact. The other one with all its, what I call it, dear differences and quirk. I offered the story to a publisher and they said, we can't use it as a youth novel because the main protagonist in a youth novel should be a teenager. Can't use a 6-year-old boy. So I changed it around and I gave him an older brother. And we told the story through the eyes of the older brother, but we used him as the sidekick, the buddy. So in the end, he was the hero that helped his brother and his team to construct the winning bridge in the bridge building competition, which is a big thing in South Africa in high school. So yeah, that was the first story. And interesting things happened. The fire brigade came to visit the school, and the fireman lit a piece of a newspaper, and there was a tiny little fire, and he said, okay, how would you douse this fire? And one child said water, and another said sand, and he said, and any other method that you can put out the fire? And he unzipped his trousers and he peed on the fire. So he put out the fire with his own little hose, and the teacher nearly collapsed, but I thought it was brilliant. I mean, think of, I've got the tools, I can put out this fire. This is the kind of thing that we used in the story. I just thought it was so dear. Anyway, the book was very well accepted, and it's still being used as a prescribed book in grade 8, 9 in our schools. Then all the wheels came off when he tried to mainstream in primary school. And eventually he went into homeschooling. And then when he was 16 years old, his parents decided to try and mainstream him again. And it was a total disaster. Socially, he just didn't understand all the subtext and all the little subtleties of school gangs and unwritten rules. And he got into so much trouble. And he flirted with a first team rugby captain. He stalked her. He got into such trouble. He got battered. He started reporting kids for bad behavior. He became a tattletale of note. So Mr. Unpopular. But then we used his story for the second novel. The first one was called Almost Einstein, and that one was absolutely Einstein. It's both in Afrikaans. I'm busy with the translation now. But it's just a story, but just showcasing the realities of being different, square peg in a round hole, neurodivergent. Where do I fit in? It led to not only enjoyment in reading, but also to a deeper understanding of what a person on the spectrum goes through.
I can't wait for that translation to come out now. I want to read this boy's story. I want to focus in on one of the first things you said, though, because I've heard it from other teachers and psychologists, school psychologists, where they will walk into these young grade classrooms where people are saying, this kid is just weird, this kid is just wild, this kid is just this or that. What do you feel like is the most important thing people misunderstand about these children and how they develop their language and their skills?
It's a hard one to answer because there are so many variations on being neurodivergent. You're not only on the autism spectrum, but you could be PDA, pathological demand avoidant. And those are the kids that just revolt against any discipline or any demands posed to them. Those kids that you can't deal with in class and that you want to just chase out of your classroom, and the most unpopular child in the school. It could be that some children are sensory seeking. They need to touch things. They need to fiddle with stuff. They need to do certain things which they're not allowed in class. And if a teacher has a better understanding of how this child functions, then she can make provision for that child in the class. For instance, if the child is sensory avoidant, doesn't want to be touched by other children, or auditory avoidant, doesn't like the school bell, doesn't like the noise, you need to know, what can I do to help this child function? Because that child has a very interesting brain, and that brain needs to be trained as well. That child also needs to learn to write, to do mathematics, the whole lot. You can become proactive. Supply the child with headphones. So supply the child with its own little desk, with a tent in which it can go and hide away when the demands of sensory input just becomes overwhelming, when the child has a meltdown. What do you do? And the moment a teacher becomes interested in a child and is not affronted or negative towards the child, then she suddenly develops a whole different attitude. What I try to do is, when I do talks to school, is to make them excited about the different child in their class and what you could learn about people by just making the effort of doing your own little research and to find that child an interesting person. Okay, it's going to take more from you, but you're going to reap the rewards. And there's a very interesting person inside this child that you just need to get to know. And the other thing I tell them is the very wise words of Rita Pearson, who said, children don't learn from people they don't like. So before you try to teach that child anything, try to like that child. Build a relationship with the child. If all you do that year is just be friendly with this child, keep this child happy in your classroom, try and find whatever stimulates that child, you've already done a lot. You've helped that child to survive in a very busy, different type of environment. And that child has become accepted by everybody else. Now that child might be ready to start learning. But the biggest problem is when a teacher just feels that this is being forced onto me. I don't have time for this. I've got 20 or 30 or 40 other children. I can't do this, and I'm not going to do this. And then the wheels come off. I've had that scenario in my face many times, where the teacher tells the headmaster in my presence, that child or it's me, choose.
That is rough. And as a teacher myself, it breaks my heart, because it's not necessarily even children who have learning disabilities or who are on the spectrum that need different ways of learning. Like, if you just look at any type of child, like, some of them learn visually, some of them learn audibly, some of them learn in different manners.
Kinetic learners that need to move.
Exactly. And so for like your school years as a child, how do oral language skills like vocabulary or storytelling or listening comprehension impact reading success in your early school years?
In a very major way. Do you know about the Pearl study? The Pearl study is Progress in International Learning and Reading Statistics. It's an international study that is done every 4 years. A country has to subscribe to it. I think they're asked by whoever is now in charge of this. So 50 countries are chosen every 4 years, and these kids have to do a reading test at the age of 10 years. So they do a statistical sample, and then these kids are exposed to this reading test. It's a little comprehension test. They have to do the answers, and then all the results are compiled, and then the countries are compared. And South Africa came 50th out of the 50 countries. We have been stone last since 2007. We have not been able to improve on our 50th position. The last test was done in 2023. But now compare that to Statistics South Africa's results that said that only 20% of children who land in grade 1, their first year of formal schooling, age turning 7, they've never heard a story read to them. The Pearl study, the results indicated that 80% of our grade 4s do not read with comprehension. How do you find the sense in these two sets of statistics? I say there's a lot of parallels, and one of the main ones is linguistic. The language skills that are lacking, the linguistic delay. There are very interesting studies by Professor Burns from the Emory University, where they took 3-year-olds, read to them without pictures, and then they watched what happened on their MRI scans. If the children understood what they were listening to, they would first show activity in the auditory area and immediately activity in the visual area. So they were making their own pictures. But unfortunately, that facility of the brain making a picture, literally drawing a picture, taking a picture of that word, castle. Yeah, I know castle. I've seen the picture. So I know what a castle is. I know what a fairy is. If you have not been exposed to that kind of brain gym, that starts to slow down by 7. The plasticity of the brain starts to diminish. After age 7, 8, 9, it gets harder to immediately conjure up that picture in your brain. Now, if kids have not had stories read to them, rich language at home, and you put them in grade 1 with kids that have had this all along, imagine the backlog. Now you're giving them a word. They can spell hat, but what is a hat? The hats that they might have at home look completely different to the hat in the book or whatever, and that goes for all the other words. So the more difficult the text becomes, the further these kids fall behind. The biggest problem with that the Pearl study showed was vocabulary and speed of reading. Those two just sank our kids. The whole idea of rich vocabulary, rich language is of utmost importance for reading comprehension.
Do they find that those numbers increase, like get better, if there's multiple languages spoken in the home versus get worse?
I think it doesn't matter. It matters whether the stories are being read, whether the language stimulation is rich in the various languages spoken at home. The child with a rich stimulation, let's take a language like Zulu or Xhosa or Sepedi. If there's a rich language at home, they hear stories. There's a rich language that can be translated into English or Afrikaans like that. But you need the richness of the stimulation. Interestingly enough, I read an American study about Mexican parents coming over, settled in New York. The study they did, they compared Mexican families speaking Spanish at home versus Mexican families speaking English at home, and then how that translates to the children's language and their academic performance at school. And interestingly enough, the families who spoke Spanish at home, their kids did better. And the reasoning was that it was a rich stimulation at home, where this first generation parents trying to speak to their children in English, it was a diluted English. It wasn't a rich language they were using. So almost, if I may call it, pidgin English that they were exposing the kids to versus the richness of their mother tongue Spanish. And the brain is a magnificent thing. Once it starts translating, that bilingual brain just goes. It's never, ever at rest. So the translation happens almost in an instant. The number of languages spoken at home is not a factor, it's the richness of the stimulation.
That is brilliant and makes me feel a lot better about how we're teaching our daughter Spanish.
The spin-off of that study had various actions happening in New York. Parents were clamoring, they were demanding to have their kids exposed to another language as well, to Spanish as well, because there are just so many advantages of being bilingual. One of the advantages is being able to function in chaos. And South Africans are very sought after overseas because when you throw anything at us, we can cope. It apparently has a lot to do with the fact that all of us are bilingual. At least bilingual, and many of us are trilingual. There's already a lot of chaos in the brain happening, so we are not getting frustrated when there's other noise or other languages in the background, where monolinguals battle more. So you might have a much more developed vocabulary, but the advantages of having a brain that sort of looks at things from different perspectives, because each language has a slightly different take on things. That's where it's all very good for math, where you consider a certain aspect, a certain principle in math, and you have these two languages, and both of them give you a slightly different idea of what's going on here. So it's more beneficial than it's not.
We've had a few people this season who have talked about the children's book sales tend to be all in physical books and very little in digital books. And so I wanted to get your opinion on, in the fast-paced digital world that we're in, how do screens and media affect a child's development and their short attention spans?
Let's just quickly look at brain function. When you listen to a story, you are mainly using your right brain. That's where your auditory function is happening. Your auditory processing is in your right brain. The other thing that's in your right brain is your creativity, your attention span, empathy is in your right brain. Okay, now when you work on a screen, and especially when you're playing a game, you are using your left brain. It's a totally left brain experience. People think that kids are very creative when they play a game, but they are mainly making choices. They are making very fast executive choices. Left brain is being stimulated incredibly well. So the left brain is being almost overstimulated. But it's that rule, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so the right brain function of listening, feeling empathy, being really creative, that's in the right brain. So that's the red light for screens, in my opinion, when screens dominate. So we find that in all schools, kids' auditory functioning has lowered. Teachers tell me that if they do not send a WhatsApp home, that message will not reach home. Children can't listen, retain the message, and relay it home to their parent. They have to send everything in text, otherwise it has not happened. That's something that parents have to keep in mind. The other thing is, a screen is something that immediately takes the parent out of the equation. A screen and a child forms a unit, and they are 100% happy by themselves. You take the parent out of the equation. A book, on the other hand, is a very jealous object, a very, very, very selfish beast. It demands that the parent sit with the child and page and read. And that brings the parent into the equation. And unfortunately, I feel that our parents are being taken out of our children's lives, out of the equation by screens. They put the screen in their hand when they strap them into the baby chair in the morning in the car. They sit with that screen until they go to school. Then suddenly they have to reprogram their brain to try and listen to a teacher that they cannot remote control. I have seen kids in the kindergarten class pretending to remote control the teacher. So that is something very real. And at this point, I would like to talk about, reading to kids before they go to bed, but just about screens and books. There was this very, very interesting study done at the Emory University by Professor Burns. They took two groups of first-year students. The first group could study with their screens, with their laptops, whatever they used, for as long as they wanted at night. And the experimental group had to stop at 10. And then they had to read a novel for 20 minutes. So they were all issued with a novel, an easy novel. And they had to read this novel, and then they tested them in the morning upon waking to check on the connectivity in the brain. Now, the amazing thing is that after the 2-week period, the connectivity in the brains of the kids who read before they went to bed, the connectivity was much higher. Why? that brain was completely relaxed by the time sleeping happened. And connectivity, sensory integration happens when you're asleep. So kids who study very late at night and use their left brain all the time with the screen and the light, they overstimulate their frontal lobes, and those lobes do not go to bed very easily. So the REM sleep starts much later, and they do not sleep as deeply as the kids who read the book. The study is, of course, too small to make it really significant, but to me, there's a huge significance. If we can get kids in this age of screens to switch off, and that half an hour before bedtime is reading time, whether a parent reads to them or whether they read themselves, make that a lifelong habit. We might just save our children's brains, their mental health, because sleep is immensely important. And the number of kids with anxiety issues and then resultant sleeping problems, or sleeping problems and then resulted in anxiety, is enormous. Anxiety is the new epidemic of our time. So to get children to read before they go to bed, to take that phone and put it in the passage, because nothing good happens with WhatsApps after 10 o'clock at night. I mean, the worst things happen at night with teens and their phones. To me, that is a very important issue, that reading and the voice, that honest, touch-feely, sensory thing of reading a page that I can turn, that is not electronic, is of utmost importance.
I think that's one of my favorite things, is if I like read a novel and I put like my little bookmark in there, and it is so exciting when you can just lift it up and you're like, oh, I have this amount left to go. Like, you don't get that when you read on a Kindle or anything like that. But speaking of story time, so how can storytelling and reading support children with language delays or speech difficulties?
Well, children learn by imitation. They tend to identify with a face. Language is caught, not taught. They catch the language through what the parents do. Therefore, the face of the parent is so important. Now, the voice, especially of the mom, is so important. The more they are exposed to that one-on-one, the better for their auditory memory, for their vocabulary. And talking about this, could I quickly refer to that study at the Ohio State University that's now been dubbed the Million Word Gap Study? I'd like listeners to go check on this and do their own research, read up about it. But they found that if a child is read to about let's say 40 minutes per day in the 5 years before they enter primary school, they would have heard about 1.2 million words. And those are the repetition of words. No, not necessarily new words. The words are being repeated, but they are hearing these words in different contexts. Now compare that to kids who have not been read to before they started school, and they talk about the million word gap between these two sets of kids. Now what they did in Ohio is that they followed those kids. The kids that were read to, the kids whose parents refused to take part in the study. And that million word gap did not diminish. These kids that had the million words more than the others were outperforming the others. And I'm not so sure whether it's only vocabulary and language, or whether it is also because of the quality time they spent with their parent. Because that book forced parent and child together. And lots of communication happens when you are reading to a child. You're not only reading the words. They talk about dialogic reading. You are reading this, and then you talk about that, and the child said, but what kind of a snake was this? And you say, maybe it was a rattlesnake. No. Maybe it was a tree snake. Maybe it was a boa, whatever. So lots of communication happens all the time. And then the child has time to offload their own worries or talk about things that happen during the day. And that makes for that wonderful communication between parent and child in this almost holy space. And it's only the child and the parent. Marianne Wolf, the big guru of reading, she says reading starts on the lap of a parent. Parents want to outsource reading to the school. Here's my child. Teach her to read. It starts at home. My daughter did her master's on early intervention, early childhood development in London. And at the London University, they have a whole department, the home literacy event. And it's so important to them. This is a field of study. And they have had this very interesting thing is that immigrant children start to outperform the British kids. And then they found that these immigrant children's parents were so worried that their kids might lag behind that they were reading stories to these kids. Every night a story. We must not let our kids lag behind. Whereas a huge percentage of the British kids' parents became lackadaisical and parked them in front of Peppa Pig or whatever was on telly, not reading to them anymore. Then they started talking about the bilingualism. These kids were all performing in their second or third language. English wasn't their first language. And that was another huge study by the University of Sydney. They used 18,000 British kids from immigrant families and from British families, and they compared their performance. And they did outperform the British kids in every aspect of academics. That whole story about Einstein, when the mom asked Einstein, what can I do to have smart children? And he said, read the child stories. But you don't understand, I want a brilliant child. He said, well, read them more stories. So reading stories is really reading your child smarter, or giving your child an optimal opportunity of developing their language and their other linguistic skills.
I feel like here in the United States, we get that advice a lot, and it's pushed from the schools, it's pushed from everybody else. Read at home, read at home, read at home. It's something that our family really takes to heart, not just because I'm a writer, but because our extended family loves novels and books and all the things. And you can just see that growth. So my question, though, is how do parents and teachers recognize if their child just needs more of that involvement in their life, or if they have a delay that needs special attention?
If in doubt, consult a specialist. If you've got that little niggle, trust your gut. If you are worried, rather have it checked out. Sometimes kids may have a unilateral hearing loss that nobody's picked up. But only once you've actually had the child properly assessed, you find out, oh my goodness, the child only had like 20% hearing in that ear. There's a whole big problem there. We have to sort it out, and suddenly everything sort of falls into place. But if you are uncertain, if you doubt whether your child is just understimulated or whether there is a problem, consult somebody. Consult a speech therapist, ask your GP. I'm not quite sure how the systems work in the States or elsewhere. I always feel that any involvement with a caring adult and a child could only be positive, whether there's something wrong or not. But if in doubt, read another book. But if you see that your child is not interested, you either have to change what you're reading, when you're reading it. If the child's too tired by bedtime, you have to do it earlier, or you're reading the wrong thing for the child, or that child might have a problem, an ADHD maybe that's not diagnosed, not be able to concentrate for long. Maybe the child's on the spectrum that prefers a screen. And that is something that we all find with these kids. They are neurodivergent. They prefer a screen. Most of them, well, that's one of the earliest signs. If that child is not interested in the book reading, story reading thing, they might turn around, look a different direction, or start playing with something else. And then, of course, with our kids, with a auditory part of their brain not being stimulated enough, they also battle, and they sometimes need a little extra help just to get that auditory skills, the analysis, synthesis, all the skills they need for eventual word building, word recognition, etc.
So I know in the school that I work in, because we have the kids that we kind of nurture before they go to primary school, then we have teachers that go to parents sometimes and say, okay, maybe your child needs to go to a speech pathologist because I can see him struggling with this and this and this. In your opinion, from what age can a parent start either being referred to a speech pathologist or decide that I feel like my kid is not listening when I'm like reading a story to him, or like he's not pronouncing the words that he's supposed to be pronouncing, or something like that?
Now, there are different aspects here. I just want to tell you that there are speech therapists working in the NICUs, in the newborn section, starting with kids right from the word go, helping with suckling, helping with latching on, helping with whatever the child's problem might be when they're in infancy. So we will start working with kids from an early age onwards. But normally with language, if a boy is 2.5 and not speaking yet? Definitely yes. But very often boys of 2 don't speak properly yet, where little girls are chattering away. So there is usually a difference between boys and girls. You get boys that are early talkers, good talkers, but lots of them are just a bit slower. So that's the one area where you get referred. Then when they're a little older, regarding the clarity of their speech and the diction, the articulation, we always have to check what the reason is. Is this child still sucking a dummy or a thumb? Is this child chewing properly, or is this child eating like a squirrel and not rolling the food in the mouth? So you have to look at all the basic functions of the mouth before you look at the speech and language. So you check for the little frenulum under the tongue if they can't pronounce r. Usually the lisp is a problem, and that's usually when they are still infantile swallowing, tongue thrust swallowing, and that's the swallowing pattern that they use when they suck a teat, either breast or a dummy. So you have to check those things out, and a speech therapist can quickly check it out. And then you can decide, okay, we need to fix this physical thing before we're going to expect better speech. Or we can say, okay, let's get the child to eat different textures. Maybe we get a feeding therapist in as well, etc. But South African criteria for an S, for a lisp, is only 5. And to pronounce the R correctly, we've got a R in Afrikaans, which is very difficult for the tongue, very fine diadochokinesis of the tongue, and that we only expect at 6. But for an L, a T, those sounds you expect at 3.5. If the child is not understood by the teacher, there is a problem. The child should be understood. That should be our main aim. If the child's not being understood, it's going to lead to frustration. And if a child is frustrated, we might end up with a stutter. Always, if in doubt, rather go once too early or too often than too late or not at all. But the worst that can happen is you have to fork out some money, and they might tell you, come and see me in a year's time.
That's brilliant. And I love how you really dug into the signs and the symptoms, because when we're writing children with these sorts of difficulties, it's important to get those details right and to represent them correctly, even if it's your main character's child, if you're writing an older book, to write the things that they're going to see. So I want to shift a little bit into that character idea. In your experience, what sort of things have you taken and had to balance with your scientific and clinical aspects with the pathology knowledge into the creativity freedom that's required for storytelling?
I've often used it, and my most recent novel was a promise that I made to a little boy that I sat next to in primary school. He stuttered badly, and he made me decide to become a speech therapist because I so badly wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. And once he started stuttering, everything would sort of go into spasm, and he had so many stories to tell, and it was so difficult to listen to him when he was struggling so much. What I've done is to use a little boy who's a stutterer. He was transitioning school, so nobody knew him. He is just this very difficult child who refuses to speak in class. So this child is then sent off with the slow readers to go and read at a shelter to dogs. That's the school's program, because they found that reading to dogs, or cats for that matter, improves the reading, because there's no anxiety when you read to an animal. That's also one of the reasons why I'm very pro having a live animal in class. Anyway, so this child then meets this dog, and this dog also has his backstory. And when the dog escapes and this stuttering child follows it and tries to catch it, they both land in a manhole, and that's where they're stuck. And the interaction with the stuttering child and the dog eventually leads to them being rescued. Both the boy and the dog then become heroes, and he realizes then when they drop a microphone down the manhole, and they talk to this child, and he speaks fluently all the time on this microphone, and this is then broadcast, and everybody can hear that he can speak beautifully. And to him, that feedback is amazing. I can speak. It's a simple story, but it's a story of hope and how you can manage your impediment. You don't have to become a victim to the impediment and feel ashamed of it. And this is you, with your disfluency or not. Make peace with it. And the more you are at ease with your condition, your problem, the better things go. And this very same little boy that I sat next to, I lost contact with when the family immigrated to America. And then our paths crossed at a school reunion, and he recently retired from a very prominent university in the States, where he was the dean and the professor of astrophysics. He speaks a perfect American without any stutter, and the moment he switches to Afrikaans, he still has a little bit of a stutter. But to me, that was a wonderful story, and I promised him I will write that story. That's the way you can sort of combine clinical experience and fantasy. And I've done the same with a child with a hearing loss and the child with the spectrum. It's very possible to use whatever you've been taught, or whatever your experience has been in your clinical field, and use it, combine it with fantasy, because I think it's so worthwhile. We all look at life through a different little lens, and we have different backgrounds, we have different specialities, and I think it's great when we can share our world vision, the way we see the world, and tell a story with people from other walks of life.
It's so very true that you say that. And it just comes back to it again. I think any novel that we write, you always take something of someone you know, or a situation you know, or a feeling that evoked in you when something happened. And that's where the true emotion and empathy comes in, through your storytelling and through your writing. So before we say goodbye to you, because this has been so insightful and so amazingly helpful, like what advice would you give to aspiring writers who come from scientific or healthcare backgrounds and want to explore creative writing?
I would just say, write what you know. We all have different fields of expertise, but write what you know. You might not think that it's interesting, but it's extremely interesting. I cannot write a novel about a paramedic, the way paramedics sort of operates in the field. But what an amazing story you can't write about, through the lens of a paramedic, a teacher, a chef, whatever your field of expertise. Write what you know. That's honest and that is believable. And especially with AI, I think write what you know, make it as authentic as possible. I think all of us are replaced by AI in due course, but while the going is still good, let's use it, because maybe one day everything will crash and all we would be left with is the stories that we can tell and that we can write. As AI has become more of a demon in the education system, students are going to be forced to write in the lecture hall, in the classroom, not at home, not on a computer with pen and paper, to take artificial intelligence out of the equation. So it's more important than ever before to read and to write.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Christien.
It's only a pleasure.
And if you would like to see more from Christien, you can go to her Facebook page at Christien Neser, or to her website, www.christienneser.com. Those links will be in the bio. We like to keep things short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here, if you enjoy the guests that we have on, the topics that we are discussing, and you just like us, then go follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Tea Tales. Then go to that purple icon on your device, and to help us so that everybody around the world can hear us and share the topics with us and share the knowledge with us, go and give us 5 stars and comment how much you love this episode, or comment how cool speech pathologists are, or comment how you're going to read to your child every single day from now on before they go to bed, so that you can help us go up. It's a moment.
And then join us next week, where we get to have our friend Claire Draycott on, and we're going to talk about 5 books that we would recommend to you. And also go check out our social medias to get into our drawing for a free blurb review from Jessie Conniff. Please check that out and share. Happy writing.
Bye.